So here's the opening question today. You ready? Do you believe that you're safe? 6 of us. Great. Right? I want you to see that question has 2 different levels. Right? When I ask the question, do you believe you're safe? There's a part of us that is rational, that maybe can look at our situation and think, rationally, measurably, statistically, yeah, okay, I'm safe. Then there's the other part of us that is about feelings and believing and really coming to grips with that emotional experience of, but do I feel safe? Do I feel safe in my life and in my world? Do I feel safe? There's the possibility that we could be, that I could take you into a highly secure facility with razor wire and security forces to protect you, and you would absolutely, there'd be literally very little chance that anything could ever harm you in that facility, and yet you still may not feel safe. So the idea of being safe and feeling safe can be very different realities. We have lots of people that are statistically completely safe, and every day they worry about their safety, and yet they couldn't be safer. So it's not enough just to be safe if you don't feel safe. And I want to deal with both of those experiences today. There's an affirmation that Louise Hay used to share that says, I am totally safe in the universe. I am safe and at peace everywhere. Together, I am totally safe in the universe. I am safe and at peace everywhere. One more time. I am totally safe in the universe. I am safe and at peace everywhere. Because what happens is it brings up the question is, do our beliefs create our reality? Right? How many of you believe that what you believe impacts your reality? Anybody want to believe that one? All right? Or do what you believe just interpret your reality? Like if I believe I'm safe, what I begin to see is my safety all around me. Or is it actually both? That what you believe actually creates your reality and actually impacts the way you look at the world. And why this is so important is because I want us to look at some of Unity's basic teachings. And one of the basic teachings that Unity holds on to is this idea that there's only one presence and one power in the universe. And that's a radical departure from most of us who were raised in a Christian church believed. We believed in duality. We believed that there were 2 powers, good and evil, and they were struggling because both of them wanted me. Have you ever been so wanted in your whole life? But the way that we look at the world actually matters. There's a story of 2 little boys and a room filled with horse poo, right? So the first little boy they bring into this room filled, you get it? The room is filled with horse poo. They bring the first little boy in, comes into the room, and he just begins to cry. He said, this is the way everything in my life works. Like it never works for me. There's poo everywhere. This is my life. This is the sum total of my existence is a room full with horse poo. They bring the next little boy in, and he's so excited. He dives headfirst into the horse poo, and he's digging through it, and he's fully engaged in it. And they're going, wait, what are you doing? He goes, with this much horse poo, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. Right? And I want you to see that those 2 points of view are actually the extremes of where we all live. We all live in this idea that life is either here to harm us or here to bless us. And in this continuum, where do you fit? Do you believe that you are safe and do you expect to be safe? Or do you expect to be harmed? Is life after you? Is it after you to take you down? Or is it after to bless you? And these are fundamental questions because they reveal how deeply we feel about life. They really reveal how much energy it takes for us to get through a day. Do you think it would be easier to get through a day if you believed that everything that day was here to bless you? Would that be easier than living from the mindset that says every day life is after me and I got to be okay? Right? That I can't trust anything. I can't trust the moment. The History Network gathered a bunch of social scientists together. And they asked them one question: is the world safe? And this is their response. Despite a few minor wars and not so minor terrorist attacks, it seems clear that more citizens in the 21st century, both in terms of raw numbers and the percentage of overall global population, will lead mundane, peaceful lives than at any other time before. This bears repeating. Today, a far greater percentage of the world's population will live in peace than in any other time in history, which is non-trivial and it curiously often underreported by the news media. By any reasonable measurement, the world is living in a golden age of peace and security, even if it may not appear to be so. Is this trend part of a permanent change, or are we just merely experiencing the latest of a respite between catastrophes? Right? How many of us believe that, right? Well, this is just a little moment. Like no one's after me in this moment, but they're coming for me. You know they're coming for me, right? The answer depends greatly on your explanation of the current age of stability, which is the subject of a robust academic debate. But it is worth noting that history contains precious few examples of returning to institutions deemed by society to be outmoded, barbaric, or futile. In other words, normative evolution is typically unidirectional, means it typically just moves up. Few would argue, for instance, that either slavery or dueling will likely reappear in this century. As long as science, technology, and the economy do not take an unprecedented steps backwards, major war is unlikely to return. Minor wars will continue to be as rare as weak states initiate the behavior of the strong. While the future is unknowable, there is for the first time good reason to believe that the future will be far more peaceful than our past. I want you to really challenge your worldview. Like, how many times in the news do we hear that the world is becoming more peaceful? And less people are actually being impacted in any measurable way by war. What if your life, that you're safer than you've ever been led to believe? So then if that's true, how do we heal our deep dread and fear of life? How do we heal that so that we don't carry into each new day a dread or a fear about what's to come? Albert Einstein asked the question, I think the most important question facing humanity is the universe a friendly place? This is the first and most basic question all people must answer for themselves. You know, in Unity, our fundamental teaching is that there is but one presence and one power, God the good. Will you say that with me? There is but one presence and one power, God the good. Now, we don't believe that. We give lip service to that. But if we truly believed that that was true, many of us would live an emotional life much different than most of us are living. If we really believed that there was only one presence and one power at work in the universe and in our lives, we would have much happier days. We would know greater levels of peace. We would not worry about this or that. We would not worry about our children or our grandchildren. We would not worry about our future. Because if that's true, that there is only one presence and one power at work in the universe and in our lives, it would change us. Emotionally, mentally, it would change the way we live. It would change the choices we'd make. It would change us in radical and yet simple ways. See, most of us were raised with this idea of duality. And duality is defined as the state of having two different or opposite parts or elements. For example, day and night, right and left, positive and negative, life and death, male and female, ups and downs, true and false, right and wrong. Because duality is a very human condition, right? And duality states that there is God, and God is separate from the creation, right? This is creation, and God is somewhere out there. But what we know is in great spiritual text, God is not separate from the creation. And we call that non-duality. And what's so interesting about this is duality is a term, meaning dual reality. Duality is a term, and we don't have a term for uni-reality. We call it non-duality, like it's a non-thing. It's a non-duality. The closest we have for a word for non-duality in our culture is oneness. So what is non-duality? Non-dualism includes a number of philosophies and spiritual traditions that emphasize the absence of fundamental duality or a separation in existence. This viewpoint questions the boundaries of conventionally imposed between self and others, mind and body, observer and observed, and other dichotomies in the shape of perception of reality. And so what happens is, from a human point of view, duality makes complete sense, right? We feel separate from God. We feel separate from each other. We feel separate from the natural world. We feel separate. There's day and night. There's up and down. There's male and female. In the human dimension, duality makes perfect sense. But from the spiritual point of view, and there's a reason why I'm going here, and from the spiritual point of view, duality begins to fall apart if we truly believe in one God. In the book, The Eye of the Storm, written by Gary Simmons, he writes about an experience with a spiritual teacher who he's interviewing for an article. And in this spiritual teacher, he thought he was interviewing for this article, and the spiritual teacher kind of got right into his space and said this to him: no one is against you. You have no adversary in life. There is nothing in the universe that is against you or your purpose. This is what is meant by an awakened future. You must leave this room knowing only one thing: nothing is against you. Nothing opposes you. Any experience you may have experienced the contrary is evidence that your mind is rooted in separation and illusion. There's a moment in our soul's evolution where we move from an experience or an awareness or a belief in duality to a level where we begin to experience life as wholly good, wholly for us. And many of us are in that place where we experience some of life from duality, and yet maybe in our times of prayer or meditation, we begin to tap into that non-dualistic, that level of oneness where we feel one with God, where we feel one with the people around us. And we begin to live from both places, where there's times when we live in fear of what could happen, and yet there's times when we touch that place of oneness that is non-dualistic, where where we touch. And the affirmation that I think is transformative is good and only good comes to me now. Will you say that with me? Good and only good comes to me now. Now, that ego part of you, when you say that, goes, no, that's not true. You know they're after you, right? You know there's bad things around every corner. And the spiritual part of you actually is entertained by that idea that good and only good comes from me now. If we go to the Genesis 50. Genesis 50 is a story of Joseph. And Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers because he was his daddy's favorite. And his brothers didn't really like the fact that he was his daddy's favorite. So after his dad dies, and there's a whole, you read in Genesis, it's a whole story of what happened to Joseph being sold into slavery and then being lifted to heights in the Egyptian king. And this is, his brothers come back to him. This is Genesis 50, beginning with verse 18. His brothers also came and fell before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, fear not, for I am in a godly place. As for you, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and for your little ones. Thus he reassured them and comforted them about what would happen. And I want you to see this, right? So Joseph gets sold into slavery. He's led into all these adventures. He's led into a position of power. He's led into a position where he actually saves people from starvation. His brothers come back into Egypt. He saves them. And God used that experience of being sold into slavery as a means to save thousands. And I want you to think about in your own life, can you see any times when you thought the situation was definitely bad? When it was bad, it was wrong, it was hard, it was awful. And then a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, you thought, that might have been the best thing that's ever happened to me. And in the beginning, you would never have believed that. You felt like a victim. You felt like life was taking advantage of you. Like those people, those dirty dogs, right, that were after you. And yet you realized that God was using it for good. And it doesn't mean that sometimes people come at you with ill intent. Not everybody's motive is pure toward you. But when you stand in the spiritual truth and say good and only good comes to me now, whatever their intent may be is not greater than the power of God. And until we begin to stand in that spiritual truth that good and only good are coming to me now, we are impacted by a world that is both good and evil, by that's up and down. But there's a spiritual evolutionary step that we are all called to take when we claim that good and only good is coming to me now. At that moment, everything in our life, no matter what it brought in, no matter what it looks like, no matter what other people's motives may be, the moment we claim that good and only good comes to me now, at that moment, we are actually lifted out of the realm of good and evil and placed at a higher level where good and only good is at work in our lives. Let's say it together. Good and only good comes to me now. Right? So there's two reactions in life. We can move into fear, or we can claim that good and only good comes to me now. Romans 8:28. We know that in everything, God works for good with those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Let me read it again. we know that in everything, God works for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. See, I want us as a ministry, as people, as individuals, to move out of the realm of good and evil and stand at a higher spiritual realm where we are claiming that no matter what's going on in our life, no matter how it may look to our ego mind, to our belief in this world, and claim that good and only good is coming to us now. Because the moment we make that shift, life gets better. We are no longer victimized by circumstance because we know that good and only good come to us now. Reading from Luke 23:34, and Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You know, we did a class, I did a class on radical forgiveness. And most of us practice forgiveness from that place of superiority. Like we practice forgiveness from our human dimension. And from our human dimension, we forgive others, usually in a level that says, I'm going to forgive you because I know what a low life you are, and I forgive you for being that low life. Right? And it's like this superior place that we put ourselves in, and that's how most of us were taught to forgive. You're a low life, and I forgive you because that's the best you're ever going to be. When Jesus was forgiving them, he was forgiving them knowing that what they were doing to him in that moment was going to be used for good and greater good so that people could see the full power of God that was within him. Jesus also said in John 10:30, the Father and I are one. See, that's where we're going, is in that experience where we are one with God. And as we move out of these limited mindsets, as we move out of these limited beliefs, and we stand in the spiritual truth, and that no matter what's going on in our life today, we say good and only good is coming to me now. We actually set ourselves free. Together, good and only good comes to me now. Now, when you say that, do you feel more powerful than when we get into our fear mindset, when we worry about who's going to take us out next? And many of us are spending days and weeks and months and years in a place of fear, worrying about what's going to happen next, instead of taking the spiritual step that says good and only good comes to me now. Together, good and only good comes to me now. Now, is it hard from time to time to make that claim when your human mind said, this is bad and only bad? Right? Because sometimes your mind goes there. This is bad and only bad. But the reality is that when your spirit claims the spiritual truth, it sets you free. Will you say it with me one more time? Good and only good comes to me now. Will you pray with me? I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to a new reality, to a new possibility, to a new outcome. That we no longer need to be tossed and turned by the waves of life. We no longer need to be in that experience of conflict and chaos and feeling victimized by the events of life. We are ready to move into a level of mastery where good and only good comes to us now. That even in the most difficult moments, in the hardest moments of our life, we stand in those moments claiming good and know that only good will come to us. Good and only good comes to me now. Together, good and only good comes to me now. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks. And so it is. Amen. This is the time. Why don't you take a deep breath? And as we move into this time of prayer and meditation, I invite you to feel the presence and power of God that's within you and all around you. And sometimes in our life we get so busy and our mind is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour that we get so involved in our own experience that we fail to quiet ourselves, that we may feel the presence and power of God. That God is always present. God is within us and all around us. And yet we have to still our minds, quiet our emotions, to truly feel that presence, that power, the glory of God. This is our time to quiet ourselves, to turn within, to connect with the deeper aspects of our soul and feel the glory of God. That sometimes we get so busy, so involved with our thoughts and our beliefs and the chatter of our mind that we feel disconnected. We feel disconnected from ourselves and we feel disconnected from God. And all it takes is a moment to become still, to let go of the busyness, and to feel all that God is. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. For the quieter our mind becomes, the more we feel connected to the infinite power and grace of God. In the worldly standard, the faster we can think and the busier we can keep ourselves, the more we feel like we're getting done, the more productive we become. And yet, from a spiritual point of view, the more we can slow down, the more we can quiet our mind, the more we feel the divine. The more that we are in the flow of the healing power of God. So today, decide. You want to keep yourself busy and moving and feeling disconnected from yourself and what's going on? Or do you want to slow everything down and feel the infinite within you and the glory of God all around you? Today we choose the path of God. We choose the path of connection. We choose the path of oneness. Of living with a quiet mind and an open heart. Peace, be still. When your mind gets busy, when thoughts are moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, we take a breath. We quiet our mind. And we open our heart. Peace. Be still. Peace. Be still. Today we celebrate the ability that we have to master our mind. To learn to be deeply quiet and to feel the presence, the sacred power of God. That we truly are one with the One. And in all things we look to God, in all things we give thanks. And so it is. Amen.